And no one loves healthcare compliance. No one grows up saying, oh, I want to work in healthcare compliance at all. But everyone grows up thinking they want to be a part of an awesome team, right? A players want to play with A players. B players want to play with C players because they just want to look better. A players want to win, right? And so our job as leaders is to be able to bring A players together and then put them in the right seat.
Welcome to the No One Ever Told Me podcast, where we talk about the things that no one ever tells you that you really need to know to be successful and to thrive in business and in leadership. Today, my guest is Chris Redhage. Chris is the co-founder of Provider Trust, a healthcare technology company, and is also the co-founder of Nashville's own Major League Soccer team, Nashville SC. I love the conversation we have today about a kid who started life disadvantaged with a learning disability, but also a kid who someone saw leadership in and called that gift out at a young age and put him on a pathway towards a beautiful and complex life as an entrepreneur and an organizational leader. His personal mission statement is others focused, and no matter what leadership hat he's wearing on any given day, Chris wakes up and thinks about serving others. Hey, Chris, thanks a ton for coming down today. I'm real excited about this. If you're at a dinner party and people are like, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
That is such a good question. A lot of times, you know, the glitzy answer is I run a healthcare tech company in town and I'm a co-owner of, Nashville SC.
Yeah, pretty good answer.
Yeah, so that's kind of a fun answer. The real answer is I literally just try to love people every day. And I fail a lot in that. And I think I succeed a lot in that. So trying to, love people, whether it's at Provider Trust or Nashville SC, and now at Nashville SC, it's thinking more like the community. Yeah. So how do I begin to take the things that I've learned how to do in a corporate space and begin to export those from a community standpoint? I love that. And I want to get into some personal mission statement stuff a little bit later in the conversation because you've got some really great stuff. But thanks.
How, in your story, how do you get from Division I women's soccer coach to founder of multiple tech companies to Nashville MLS SC? Yeah,
so it probably starts a little bit before then.
Okay, take us there.
I played soccer, played collegiately at University of Richmond.
Okay.
Grew
what
up,
position?
I was a center back. So
okay.
I always say that the higher I got in the levels, the further I went back in the field until I couldn't go play keeper.
You weren't going to play goalie?
I tried, but being 6'5" and you get hurt a lot unless you really learn how to fall. And so the idea of I played after Richmond, I played a little bit of professional soccer, made no money, but I kind of got a start in the entrepreneurial side of things. Okay. I'd always been I have two brothers and I was always selling all the candy for baseball, right? Before all my friends, I understand the idea. You got to get to the market fast so that people will buy your candy. So I'd sell my candy and my brother's within 24 hours. So I was always thinking about, how do I create money? How to create value to do the things that I wanted to do. Yeah. We didn't grow up with a lot. So I had to sell things or go do jobs to be able to pay for summer camps, Wow. And so after school, kind of a funny story, I was playing soccer professionally in Atlanta for Atlanta Silverbacks, and my mom was kind of frustrated. And she's like, what are you going to do about health insurance? And, as a 22-year-old, you're like, Mom, I'm living out my dream, right? So
who needs health insurance?
Yeah, who needs health insurance? And that was before Obamacare and all the fun things. But after playing collegiately and professionally, I went on and started coaching at the University of Nebraska.
Okay.
And I was actually interviewing for the head assistant job.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, God, if I get this job, then I'm going to stay in soccer. If not, I'm going to do something else. Yeah. Well, the funny thing is a gentleman named Joe White called me literally the next day. And I was at a movie. I know exactly where I was in downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. And he says, this older guy in Louisville, Kentucky, wants a young kid to come start companies. And I was in this interview process at University of Nebraska. And so I was like, I don't know what to do. So I was like, the only thing I kind of really knew about was to pray and fast. Okay. So I prayed and fast for 2 or 3 days, and I ended up not getting the soccer job. And I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. Okay. So that's kind of, that's where the business entrepreneurial started. I went and worked in Louisville for a couple of years. He, in essence, had a blank check to be able to buy businesses and start companies. And so I got to do 2 semi-successful, 1 total failure company. But I learned how to do it. I learned how to raise money. I learned how to start things. I learned how to use everything that I'd been developing in my life to literally start companies.
Looking back, why do you think you were the person that got that phone call?
I was outgoing. I was entrepreneurial. I think I started a company in college that focused on leadership development on college campuses called Destination 7. I still own the URL today.
Nice.
But I think people just could kind of see me starting things and being a little bit unique. When I was driving out here, I was just on a product release call. And I was listening, and it chimed in. They asked me to talk about a new product that we're creating. And I thought, like, no one ever writes stories about the normal. If you just do things every day. Now, there is beauty in normal, right? I don't want to like poo-poo that, because you have to like operate. You have to do those things. But people write and stories get told about the abnormal. And a lot of times that's the scary part. And so at Provider Trust, we talk about like push into the conflict, because the creative conflict is actually where the beauty is at. And so I think I was like crazy enough to do like the creative conflict throughout my life, and people kind of saw that. And I see that a lot in people and entrepreneurs that are taking chances. They're stepping in. They don't want to be normal. They want it to be great. And they have this vision, and they're like, that can be better if I just do this.
Yeah. Okay. Did you know, I would call that visionary leadership. It's a relatively rare gift. Did you identify that in yourself? Did other people call that out in you? When did you know that I've got something kind of unique that maybe my friends and people in my family don't have, and I can pursue this path?
Yeah, it is unique, and we're all unique, right? We all have our different gifts and sets. And so within this ecosystem of life, like, I can't play the trumpet, I can't sing, but I see product and I see opportunities. And so I had a learning disability. I couldn't read until I was in 3rd grade. And so I had to learn how to connect to people really, really well and anticipate problems or anticipate where I needed to go before they told me where I needed to go, which is a gift, but also could be really, really bad when you do it wrong. Right. And so I think early on, like 5th or 6th grade, I remember I got selected to go to this leadership school. This is in 5th grade at like Gallup. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and people have probably heard of Gallup polling and stuff like that. They were started in Lincoln, Nebraska.
I didn't know that.
Since moved to Omaha, but they had this leadership thing in elementary schools, and I got selected, and I was like, I'm a leader? What? And I went to it, and it literally, I think, changed the trajectory of my life, because someone believed in me enough to say, hey, you're a leader, and you get to go to this in 5th grade. And then I've had people pour into my life throughout, but like, I think back on that time, which is just like, someone's just like, you're a leader, go to this school. And so I just started thinking in terms of that.
What a gift to get that at an early age, for a couple of reasons. One is it really set you on a specific path, but then, as a leader, if you call that out in somebody else, you could put them on a similar path too. And that makes an impact in somebody's life.
Yeah.
That's really cool. How old is Provider Trust as an organization?
We just turned 11 years old.
Okay. And I happened to have dinner with some of your employees last night, completely unrelated to this conversation.
We call them team members.
Okay, sorry, team members. And one of them said 2020 was a fantastic year from a growth standpoint, and this year's looking pretty good too. So over the course of 11 years, you guys are still churning and burning. What is driving growth at Provider Trust right now?
People.
Okay.
Right. Hiring really good people to join the team.
That's awesome.
And when you get that wrong, it is so hard to grow because
they both reference that, by the way, that hiring is a really high value. You guys have a very high bar to get in. It's a lengthy process because you evaluate well, is what they communicated to me. But once you get past that, you know you've accomplished something significant because you're on a team that puts that many barriers to the entry. Is that right?
Yeah. We always say hire slow, fire fast, right?
Yeah.
And we actually have this thing that we've put in place because we've missed, and it's not because that person isn't talented. It's because that person doesn't fit within our unique culture and what we need to do, right? We believe everyone has talent. So another important person in my story is an individual named Kimberly Rath, Doug and Kimberly Rath, and they run Talent Plus, which is actually in Lincoln, Nebraska, but they focus on hiring the right people, right? Having structured interview process, like figuring out what their unique gifts and talents are, because when you add talent and gifts, right, you get this magical talent plus, this idea. And so they want everyone to go to a job that they love. And no one loves healthcare compliance. No one grows up saying, I want to work in healthcare compliance at all. But everyone grows up thinking they want to be a part of an awesome team.
Yes.
Right? A players want to play with A players. B players want to play with C players because they just want to look better.
Yeah.
A players want to win, right? And so our job as leaders is to be able to bring A players together and then put them in the right seat, right? So we have a thing when we miss, we actually at 90 days, we'll literally pay them $5,000 to go find another job.
That's
brilliant. Right? Because part of that is our fault if we miss on that. And I constantly am like, we have to get better at this. We have to get better about helping people find their mission, find their passion, right? We have this whole passion project at Provider Trust. It is, and really it comes out of need to know what to talk to people about when you see them in the hall. Okay. Because when you're a company of 10 versus a company of 100, I mean, there's 30 people at Provider Trust that we've hired during COVID. I've never even met him. I'm going to meet them next week in person. I mean, I've talked to them on a Zoom call. Sure. And so being able to help them identify their passion so that they are excited to come to work. And if they can connect their job to their passion, and it could be in Provider Trust or outside of Provider Trust, but if they could connect their job to their passion, it's no longer just a job, it's a vehicle to get to what they're passionate about.
Okay. So we're talking about a lot of really important stuff here. So you, at some point, you understood that organizational performance is tied to culture. When were you able to identify that if I create the right culture with the right players, I'm going to get the organizational performance that I need out of that? Was that a seminar? Was that a book? Or did you instinctively know that building a team was a vehicle to get there?
Yeah. So growing up, Talent Plus really helped me realize selection process, playing a part of sports teams and seeing the difference between a good team and a mediocre team. Okay. Right. And recognizing that a good team doesn't have all the best players, but they're the best team. Right. And a lot of times it takes different characters to create that team. That's right. Right. You're not all the same. So you need the diversity of thought. You need the diversity. You have to have conflict. One of the stories and tragedies in my life is going through a divorce. 2011, 2012, I'd been married for 3 years and recognizing that there was no conflict in my marriage. So therefore, when there was needs, we didn't know how to have conflict in a healthy way and stay in it. And so recognizing that culture is about being able to identify the people that need to be in that, putting them in the right place, and then practicing the things on a daily basis. If you want to have great culture and you want to be a great team, then you actually have to do it. Yeah. So we have a morning meeting for 10 minutes every morning where we go over a core value. We talk about that. And it's just a constant reminder that you have to be called back into that.
Okay. So you are the person ringing the bell to those organizational values, those cultural values. Every day we're pointing towards one of those things, and that keeps you guys aligned.
Yep.
Okay. How do you foster healthy conflict in the organization to get that creative process out?
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Okay. Because most people don't love conflict. They struggle with it.
I mean, if you are, you're kind of crazy. Hey, like, you don't want to be around those people.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't like conflict at all. Okay. I dread it. I also know that it's good for me. Right. And if I want to get to a place that is healthy and healthy for that person and healthy for me, like, you have to have conflict. You have to be, because a lot of times your perspective is different than their perspective. And they're seeing something completely different than really what the ultimate truth is. Yeah. Right. Just because you're having feelings doesn't mean that it's true. Right. It's a feeling, and your feelings are true, but doesn't mean that that situation is true.
You could stop and preach about that for a little while, but we'll move on.
So just this idea of, like, we actually have a framework that you have to have conflict within 24 hours. You if you want to talk to a person, you have to talk to one person about it, and then they're responsible for you to come back and have that within 24 hours. So we have a framework for conflict because most people don't like it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's get out of the weeds for a second, because I love that. And we could probably go further into it, because that stuff fires me up, because that's really practically how you build an organizational culture, is with behaviors that are downstream of these values that you have that sets you up for the success you're having. But let's go back to the story for a minute, because as you're building provider trust, I think in your heart, soccer still played a really pivotal role. So these things worked on top of each other. Will you tell us about the process for MLS to come to Nashville and starting the Nashville Soccer Club, and how your involvement in that project happened?
So I love soccer. It has taken me all over the world and gotten me out of some really dark places in my head. When I get in a frustrated place, when I get in a sad place, the most, like, cathartic thing for me to do is to go out and juggle a soccer ball, or knock a soccer ball into a net, or just play. And it's just this idea of, like, that's what I did when I was a kid, right? When I was lonely and we didn't have any money and we had, like, I'd go outside and play soccer, and it took me all over the world. Right. So when I moved down here, I met an individual named David Dill, and he is kind of like my big brother. He's a CEO of a large hospital system here. And we had always joked about owning an MLS team and being owners, but we always thought that it was be post in acquisition. Like when I sold Provider Trust, or he got done with his healthcare company, like we would do that. But fast forward to 2015, I think 2016, they kind of blend together because it was a pretty intense couple of years. But there was an out-of-town group that was looking to bring pro soccer to Nashville, and at the time we had Nashville SC, which was an amateur team. So an individual named Chris Jones literally started it with a tweet in a bar. Wow. And it was a supporter-owned club, but they didn't have the funding to be able to take it to the professional level. So he and then this individual named Marcus Whitney, who is an entrepreneur, venture capitalist here in town now, but has a phenomenal, amazing story. But he was the chairman at Nashville FC. Okay. Right? Marcus reached out to David Dill, because David Dill was in healthcare, and said, hey, I'm putting together this a meeting to see if anyone in Nashville is interested in bringing pro soccer. So David Dill called me. I couldn't go to the meeting. I was in Washington, D.C. at this really stressful meeting. I walked out and I called David, and he's like, hey, I went to this meeting. He's like, do you want to do this? And I said, yes. And so David Dill, myself, Marcus Whitney, Chris Jones started working, and we ended up buying the amateur team. Okay. And then that's when everything just started down this hill.
Real quick, that phone call after the stressful meeting, was there any part of you that may have said no to it? Just because that day was
not at all.
The day wasn't that stressful.
Yeah, well, it was stressful. It was probably one of the top 5 stressful meetings in my life.
Wow.
But it was like I was made for this. Like I want to see soccer change this city. Soccer has such a unique, if you look around the world, every demographic plays soccer. Mm-hmm. right? And so if you bring soccer into Nashville, like we're a pretty diverse culture. And so my passion is that soccer is a catalyst for changing this city, and bringing joy, bringing, repairing lives, just giving people a vision and a hope of what life could be, whether it's at a match for 90 minutes or it's watching, this club grow.
I could be wrong. I bet if you polled the MLS owners, majority share, minority share, whatever, do you think anybody else has a why like yours? I mean, because you're not talking about revenue, you're not talking about ticket sales, you're not talking about championships. You're talking about a unifying game that was significant in your life that you hope is unifying and significant in other people's lives. That's a really catalyst why that moves people towards action. Does the ownership group share that with you, or is that kind of your own personal one? Yeah,
I mean, I hear people talking about it. I think my why comes out of a lot of hurt, a lot of tragedy that's happened in my life, and just this idea that, people's passions can change the trajectory of their lives.
That's right.
I mean, my life has been completely changed because I started Provider Trust, $10,000 on my back porch, with this idea that I know how to start businesses and I see an opportunity in healthcare compliance. And I'm like, I'm going to take this shot. And I want to show people and give people an outlet to say, hey, listen, you're never going to score unless you take that shot.
Right.
Right. We tied last night. We had 20, outshot Atlanta.
Great game.
Right. The thing that's so different about this year's team versus last year's team is that we're taking shots. We're scoring goals. Right. Where we're at the end of the season, it's going to be really fun, but you got to take the shot.
Was Provider Trust the first organization that you started for yourself? Because you were basically with someone else's checkbook, you were starting businesses for the guy in Kentucky. When did that turn in you? When did that shift in you to say, I like doing this, I'm learning a lot, but maybe I should take a chance on myself? Was Provider Trust that first chance, or did you start stuff before then?
Yeah, I started smaller things.
Okay.
And Provider Trust was a side hustle, right?
So can we talk about small things and side hustles for a second? Okay,
I got a lot of them. Nashville SC was a side hustle. Like, what people don't realize is that Nashville SC started in Provider Trust's office. Right. I have pictures of Mike Jacobs and Gary Smith, who was the GM. I have a selfie. He was going to our printer and printing off the first player to ever sign for Nashville SC. Taking a selfie, literally in our office.
Yeah.
They moved out. We then got bigger and expanded and then had to move to a new, Nashville SC was a side hustle. Right. My new company that I started called Fair Whistle. Right. Not a lot of people know about it, but it's a side hustle, and we currently do referee assessments for professional soccer clubs. I've kept it super side hustle-y. It's my passion. It actually is a creative outlet for me.
That's cool.
And we've been doing it for 3 or 4 years, right? And it's just it's a cool little, I saw a problem. Everyone was complaining about referees. And I was like, well, how are we assessing them? And they were using paper. And so I put it on an application and built it.
You digitized it.
Yeah.
Well, several of the guests in the first season referenced this idea, before we fire cannonballs, we fire musket balls. It's Jim Collins' thing.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're going out and betting the farm and starting these major organizations. They have started small. They've started as a part of your passion project on the side, and they've turned into things.
Yep.
In the circles that you run in and the rooms that you're in, is that the case for other entrepreneurs in Nashville? They start small and it grows?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they have an idea, they have a passion, and once you get a hit, then you could start self-funding the other ones, right? But it takes that risk. Like, you have to. I remember I didn't have a lot of money, and I'm like, I'm writing a check for $10,000 to build this application, right? And I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, that's right.
And if I lost $10,000, I lost $10,000. Right? So you shoot small bets, you place small bets to see what's going to hit.
Okay.
Because if you fail, it hurts and it sucks, but it's small.
So how'd you get comfortable? Were you always comfortable with risk and failure as a young person, as a young adult? Okay.
Yeah. I think I just failed a lot. I'm not I was hanging out with my best friend for lunch today, and he's like, Chris, you're pretty spiky. I'm like, yeah, I am pretty spiky. Like, I've got some really great talents, and I got some really bad talents, right?
Sure.
Like, I'm horrible operationally.
Okay.
Right? I can do it. It's really tiring, but I can also see 6-12 months ahead on where our product needs to be.
Yeah.
And I could call our product people out into, a bigger story and say, if we don't do this now, we're going to be behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
But like organizing the team to get there, like I need help in doing that.
When I'm trying to draw friends of mine out into more courageous leadership, into more entrepreneurial behavior, I'll usually ask them to read the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. Mm-hmm. And he talks it into that book about, man, if I make 10 bets, I know 3 are going to fail miserably. 3 are going to maybe break even, and 3, maybe 4 might actually hit. And it's like, I had a guest on, he said, if you bat 300 in the MLB, you're in the Hall of Fame. Like 3 out of 10 is all it needs. And that's how I think about my business. If I can get 3 out of 10 ideas across the line, I'm gonna succeed.
But in basketball, that would be really bad.
That would be really bad in basketball. We're only talking about one sport here, and it's soccer. What's 300 in soccer? I'm just kidding. So some people just don't have the stomach to fail that often or to break even that often. It's like, I think social media has almost amplified with this culture and with generation. It looks like people succeed overnight. It looks like people, every time they take a chance on something, it works out for them. But the reality is that we fail a whole lot. So how would you maybe reverse engineer culture to get more comfortable being more courageous and being more bold in their leadership and trying things out?
Yeah, I think one thing that is really important, and I see a lot of entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, make a mistake in, is they're taking bets, but they're taking too many bets.
Okay.
Right? Meaning that sometimes bets don't work out right away. Sometimes you have to iterate. And, people talk about pivoting and, what's the idea? And you have to we talk product market fit, right? But you also have to have some margin in there in those bets. So you can't, we were talking earlier, you can't fill this cup completely to the top, because what if you wanted to add some ice in it? Because the product market says that you need to have cold water. Well, you can't do that. It's going to spill over. And so you have to have a little bit of margin in your life to be able to say, oh, I think that this is going to work, so then I could put a little bit of extra effort into that area while you're still doing some of the other stuff. And then if it takes off, then you're like, okay, I got one, right? And then be disciplined enough to say, okay, these other ones aren't working out, so I need to, focus on this one. But you still need that margin, right? Because, they're chapters in our lives.
Yeah.
It's not just all one chapter. And so we have these chapters that are building us and calling us into ultimate this story that God has written for us to bring glory to Him.
I love that. The idea of margin when it comes to thought for me, we're so tempted to fill up our moments. And even if there's not something on our calendar, we pull out our phone so that we're distracted, or we jump into emails even though it's not really time on the calendar to work in emails. There's always something we can distract ourselves with. But I actually think some of my I don't know that I have great ideas, but a lot of my ideas that have been decent have happened when I've given myself margin. I haven't distracted my mind with TV, with social media, with work and being busy. It's like sometimes you need that margin in your life so that great ideas can occur, you know? And,
you're going to bump into ideas all over the place.
Yeah.
The challenge is, can you execute it? And can you get it from that little small thing to a bigger thing that people are like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Right. That's the challenge. And that's where this margin kind of comes in place. Like, you have to make margin for your life. And I do think technology and cell phones and stuff like that, the anxiety you hear people talk about is this constant, I have to fill my mind. I have to fill my mind. Well, you're only filling your mind with what other people want you to put in your mind, as opposed to seeing life happen and being like, oh, how can I create something out of that?
That's good. You briefly touched on this with your personal mission statement earlier. You didn't call it that. You just said you want to wake up, you want to love, you want to make a difference. How does that intersect in a corporate environment? And then obviously you've got the world of major league sports. Why is that important to you? That's how you build relationships and how you engage the world? And is that difficult in these corporate environments?
Okay, why?
Yes.
the mission, create irresistible environments, ... Right. Yeah. And really the idea within that is, you have to create this culture. You have to create this environment for people to come alive, right? When you start planting plants, you have to put water. It has to have good soil. You have to have that. So the idea is like, bring them into a culture. They're going to have, rough edges. They're going to have scars because we all have stories, right? But how do we create this culture where people could come in and you begin to cultivate them, and then they begin to blossom, right? And whether they stay at Provider Trust or Nashville SC or whatever, I really don't want them to for the rest of their life, right? I want them to blossom and go other places. And I get really jazzed seeing that because people did that to me. They built into me. And they said, hey, Chris, you didn't have a ton. Parents loved me. They gave me everything that I could ever want, right? But I also had to pay for my own camps. I also had to get a college scholarship to go to school, right? And it was mainly because we didn't have the resources to be able to do that. But out of that tragedy and out of that struggle came this need to succeed and this need to grow. So I think for me, it's like, why do I want to create irresistible environments so that others can live out their passions, is because people have done that for me.
Wow.
And I know now how to do that better so that we could pull more out of people.
So I would imagine things war against that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Organizational pressures, quarterly goals, all those things. So how do you get all those things to sync up where you still keep your why at the center of your day every day?
It's hard. Okay. And a lot of times you fail and you struggle. And, when you start thinking about individual lives, like that's whether you're a leader at Provider Trust or someone who just started, like I care about them. I want them to leave every day saying, I'm passionate about living my life. Now, and that's probably not healthcare compliance.
Sure.
But they're able to connect healthcare compliance and Provider Trust to their life. Or I love Nashville SC because I know it's changing this city. It's giving people opportunities. And so for me, it's just like, that's the struggle. The beauty's in the struggle. Yeah. Right. The beauty is in the fact that we have to grow 20 to 30% a year. And that gets harder every year. Yeah. Right. When you hit 20 million in revenue, now you have to do 6 million the next year. So you got to get to 26, and we'll have these spikes, but it just gets hard. Yeah. And you have investors, and then you have other leaders, right? As the company keeps growing, they need more. And so it's this constant, like, sometimes it's tiring, sometimes it's super lonely, and you just got to kind of trust the process.
Wow. That's good. Let's jump into Nashville SC for a few minutes. How do you build a world-class quality organization? You talked about team, you talked about talent, but organizationally, everything from ownership group to general management, front office, coaching staff, strategy, plays and plans, and then team. Where do you start to build an organization like that? Where's the foundational pieces for that?
Yeah,
that puzzle?
I think the foundation really comes from the top, right? Okay. And John Ingram, David Dill, myself, Marcus, a couple of the other owners, like we're just passionate about the city, and we're passionate about collaborating. I mean, John didn't have to work with us, right? Like billionaire, right? Has done, I mean, his name is, their family name is on all these buildings around the city. And he was humble enough to be like, let's work together on this. So I think just this idea of community building comes from the top, and then it's hiring really great people. I mean, you look at Gary, right? Unbelievable coach.
Great coach.
Who's won a MLS Cup before. Right. And he got fired from Colorado, and I met him for an interview in Atlanta. Funny story around that. We'll talk about that some other day, but we ended up hiring him. Mike Jacobs, who's, our GM and really leading the technical side, is just like, he's passionate about building something to win a championship. And that guy is a tireless worker.
Wow.
And then you have Ian Ayres, who came in, who was the CEO of Liverpool, right? And he just wants to build something from the ground up. And so
architect.
You just have these men and women who are just passionate about just working together and collaborating. And it doesn't mean that it's not hard. It doesn't mean that there's not disagreements. But I think from the top and from the beginning, this club was, the tagline with Nashville FC and SC was "Our Town, Our Club," and we really have it. It is our town. It is our club, and so we want all of Nashville to kind of believe in that.
I saw somebody's post for the game last night. You guys played Atlanta, and it was a husband and wife, and they said this is our favorite date night. They have season tickets, and the way they connect, like what helps build in their marriage is to go to these games. And it's like, it's not just sport, it's not just community. Like there's stories in there, and it matters to people's lives, and that's a really cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit. We've talked in other conversations about you've got a vision to do more with soccer in the city of Nashville. We talked about this a minute ago, where multiple cultures, so much diversity when it comes to playing soccer because there's low barrier of entry. If you have a ball and a couple friends, you can go play.
Yep.
And it builds teamwork, it builds foundation. There's so many things that it can build in young people. So if you're going to change Nashville and some of the communities that are under-resourced, you've got a vision to maybe change those potentially through some opportunities to play soccer. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah. So one of the passions I have is to build soccer fields all over the city. And so we've built 3 of them. We're getting ready to build one in Edge Hill, and we're collaborating with a couple churches, a neighborhood church, and then Cross Point, where I go.
Yeah.
And then the police department.
Okay.
On building a field right there in Edge Hill. And so this idea that we want to build neighborhood pitches all over the city so we could remove the cost of playing.
Okay.
Right. If we want to change the city, we got to connect the city. So what better way than to build fields in these neighborhoods, and then these neighborhoods come to the stadium, this new stadium that we're building. So this idea of, we want this to be our club. And when you say our club, it's all clubs. I saw, I was actually talking to a friend, and she's Hispanic. And she said that this at a Nashville SC game was the first time she saw our people interacting with Nashville. And this idea of like a lot of times within a diverse city and we each have our own neighborhoods and we stay separate. Right. But at Nashville SC, you have all demographics.
Yeah.
Right.
Even from affordability of tickets, it's a very reasonable night to get into and get out of that stadium.
And it's going to be even better at the new stadium.
Really?
30,000 seats. Parking isn't going to be as expensive. We're going to have awesome neighborhood type food. Like, I got to tour it.
Where are you guys in the construction process?
It'll be done in May or June of next year. So awesome. The roof is already on top of one of the sides. They'll finish all the outdoor work probably in November, December, and we'll be playing a match in there in May or June of next year. But can you imagine 30,000 people showing up, chanting, all the noise from the back line, which is the supporter group, all that noise staying in the stadium? It's just going to be
electric,
awesome.
Man. It's going to be incredible.
It's going to be great.
Fun question. Who do you follow outside of the U.S. soccer? So are you a English Premier League fan or Euro?
Yeah, so everyone asks. I'm a Fulham fan, so they just got relegated.
Bummer.
Yeah, but the reason why is because they were such a big supporter of American soccer players.
They did always bring
early on. So Dempsey, Brian McBride, a lot of these players, and so it was before it was cool to bring Pulisic over and have him play for Chelsea, and he's $20 million player. They were supporting these guys early on. I remember Brian McBride. He played for the Crew, which is
Columbus Crew. That's right.
One of my good friends who was my teammate at the University of Richmond. He's the GM and president for the Crew. His name's Tim Bezbachenko. But I remember like Brian McBride getting cut and like blood running down his face and be bandaged up and playing. And then I saw him playing for Fulham, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, you could be a soccer player and go overseas.
Yeah.
So
that didn't happen a ton.
No.
Growing up for us. So it's cool to see.
And it's
those.
starting to happen. Like MLS becoming a selling league. And so we're starting to see some of these amazing academy players. I mean, Dallas, Philadelphia, Seattle, like they're starting to develop these really great young players.
And in the cities that are kind of established, and we won't go super soccer nerd, we'll try to stay leadership-y, but the system gets built from the top down when it comes to these cities. Is that correct? So like playing styles, playing systems starts with your local top level team, and it builds down into the younger age.
Yeah. So you have your first team, then you have a reserve team. You're starting to see that out. So you have MLS, then you have USL, and a lot of the MLS teams have teams in the USL. But yeah, then you have these academies. And so you'll see us start signing players at 12, 13, 14 years old into our academy.
And that's where the success of the, English Premier League teams happens, is that they're these city center teams that have these academies at certain ages. They're moved up in the program as they're more talented. That's cool.
Yeah. So then the idea is that as we're building these fields, we're getting more people involved in soccer and more
it's a recruiting strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it's a people development, a city development strategy, right? Like if we get players that learn how to play together and how to be good teammates, and, a couple of them are going to be stars. And so they'll literally be playing on these mini pitches, and 10 years later, they'll be playing at Nashville SC on our stadium.
That's such a great vision. I love that. What's some of the best leadership advice you've been given over your career? Anything stick out?
Life's tragic, God's faithful. I think for me, like that's been really helpful. Just like there, all this conflict that we talked about, like don't run from the conflict.
Okay. Run
to it. Because that's actually where the beauty happens. You have to be smart. You have to be, you can't love conflict. You can't do it all the time. But there's beauty in that. So I think for me, like I grew up using my gifts and talents of reading situations, trying to avoid conflict. But really what I need to do is use my gifts and talents to be able to read, to know when to step into the conflict.
That's good.
So just this idea of like, a lot of times your scars are your biggest gifts.
That's
and
right.
I think, me learning, not being able to read, not seeing conflict played out in my house, thinking that life is good when there's not conflict. So I spent my life trying to avoid conflict, and that didn't get me very far. It didn't get me what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so being able to use those gifts and talents that come out of tragedy in my life, being able to use those for good, to create these great environments.
I love that. Are you a routine guy? Do you have some habits and best practices that you do on a consistent basis?
Yeah, I get up early.
Okay.
I exercise early. I'm a faith person, so I like to, get in the Word or listen to the Word, just to kind of get my mind right. I believe that the day is won early in the morning.
I like that.
And so, get up early.
So you're a disciplined guy.
I think I was like kind of born that way. I am disciplined from a sports standpoint, but like I wake up every morning at 5:30 and I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Like
I might have had like not very much sleep, or like this morning, my best friend, who's my business partner, him and his family are in from Oxford. He lives in Oxford, and he has a 8-year-old son, and he came into my room this morning at 4:00 because he didn't know what room to go into. He's like, hey, I'm having jet lag, but I don't know where my parents are, but I knew where your room was, right? And so that's a perfect example of creating an environment where someone feels comfortable to walk in at 4 a.m. and be like, hey, where do I go? Where do I go? Right? And if more people had the courage to just ask, where do I go? There would be a lot more beauty in this world.
I love that. I love great questions. And where do I go is a really important question.
Yeah.
Well, let's end up with this last question, the title question for the show. So looking back over the course of your leadership, running multiple organizations and bringing a professional soccer team to Nashville, Tennessee, what's the most important thing you know now that no one ever told you on the front end of this journey?
Step into the tragedy, step into the hard stuff, because that's actually where the beauty comes out, right? Like had a guy embezzle money from me, right? $500,000, was leading my Bible study, and on Wednesday I find out. And like, I had to step into that tragedy to recognize, like, I don't want to be a part of an organization that I can't trust, that people are going to steal money, right? Like, I want to be a part of an organization that cares about people and passions. And so I stepped into that with a lot of anxiety, a lot of scariness, and a lot of failure along the way. But I stepped into that and I was able to create something. And the same thing with Nashville SC. Like, I remember a time when I was laying on the couch. This is probably 2016, 2017, but right after we announced the USL team, and when we were negotiating putting the groups together with John and our group. And I call Marcus Whitney and I go, "Where are you?" He's like, "I'm at home on my couch." I'm like, "I'm at home on my couch too, because this is so hard." I literally left work and went home and just had to take a nap. Right. But it's that tragedy and stepping into it and recognizing, like, that's going to happen. If you're living, there's going to be tragedy. But you also have to realize that God's faithful in the midst of that.
That's so good. Chris, this has been just a treat. I mean, I love how you're not just contributing to Nashville by these two organizations, but you have a vision to change and unify and build Nashville into something different and special. So on behalf of the people that listen to the show and myself, thank you for what you've done in Nashville. Thank you for helping bring this soccer team to our community. We're grateful. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hot dang, who's ready to buy Nashville SC season tickets? Today's conversation had so many great moments. Here are just a couple of my favorites. I love Chris's revolutionary approach to building a world-class healthcare tech team. He said it like this: "No one grows up dreaming about working in healthcare compliance, but everyone grows up and wants to be on a winning team." He's learned to leverage our human winning instinct to get his team passionate about winning, even if it's not in a game they're passionate about playing. Chris only hires A players because A players want to win. They want to play with other A players, and his practice of offering B players $5,000 to leave after 90 days if they're not a fit, well, that's a recipe to keep success rolling in. Another thing I really connected with was when Chris talked about the improvement of this year's Nashville SC team over last year's team. He said the biggest difference is that we're simply taking more shots. And one of the non-soccer fans' biggest critiques of the game is that it's kind of boring. And trust me, I get it. Games end in 0-0 ties, or maybe somebody wins 1-0 and so on. But the way you score more goals is to take more shots. I think the leadership equivalent here is to execute on more of the great ideas. Great ideas are everywhere, but you've got to take a shot with them or they go nowhere. Michael Scott says it best: you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott. Finally, I love Chris's story of his business partner's kid walking into his room and asking, "Where do I go?" I personally love to connect with people who are in transitional moments in their lives. It's a sacred thing to be asked for help or to be asked for advice, and I never want to take those conversations for granted. I think leaders should always aspire to create the kind of environments that people always feel safe in and are willing to walk into your office and ask, "Where do I go?" I've got friends and leaders in my life that I can ask those types of questions to. And if you're building a business or simply building into your personal development, make sure you've got someone in your life, someone in your corner that you can ask a question like that. All right, that's it for today. If these conversations are helpful or interesting or even inspiring, take a minute to share this podcast. It would mean the world if you did that. So thanks for stopping by, and make sure you join us next time on the No One Ever Told Me podcast.